Our next topic is cultural awareness and cultural sensitivity. However you define cultures, they certainly exist. They have different ways of expressing themselves. Examples are different senses of time and timeliness, different views about what you should and under no circumstances shouldn't talk about. Issues of formality. Is this a more formal or more informal kind of culture? Food and health. What should you do if offered food that you think might make you sick? Those would be examples of how you have to deal with the fact that you will be in a culture often unfamiliar to you. So let's turn it over to the panel for some of their own issues as they dealt with different cultures.
Certainly. So I'll just expand, I guess, on the punctuality and the food issue, because they were particularly relevant for me. With regards to punctuality, I think it's oftentimes, especially when you're doing field research, you forget that these organizations that you're going to or these people whom you're interviewing, you're not their priority. And so, you know, I often found myself feeling very indignant that someone wasn't showing up on time, but then I'd have to realize that they were, you know, coordinating a refugee camp, and so that they had some more important things to do. And so keeping that perspective, I think, is really important. That being said, you might have to be a little bit more aggressive when you're scheduling appointments or meetings with people. And then with regard to food, again, I knew I was going to somehow get ill, and so it was just inevitable, and I accepted that. And so, but I did avoid much of the street food, and one of the more difficult things was being offered food, particularly in these refugee camps, and so I knew that it wasn't prepared necessarily in the most sanitary way, and so I had to refuse it, but that was just a cost that I incurred, basically. So obviously I didn't want to. I was afraid that was going to be offensive, but I just had to prioritize my own health over that, so.
Yeah, so for me, the food thing, it depends on your context. I decided beforehand that, so I'm a vegetarian here at Stanford, but I decided beforehand that I would go ahead and eat whatever my host family was offering me just to accommodate them. And I know that meat's a very important part of their diet, so that involved me eating a lot of red meat. And I was fine the whole time. But also, for me, I was also offered a lot, and hospitality was a really big element. And I kind of made it a rule for myself to go ahead and accept things, which was difficult sometimes because of reciprocity. Like, I always wanted to give something back, and depending on what context it was, I had money for human subjects, the human subject reimbursement. So sometimes that would take the form of giving back food or money, but lots of times money just is not correct in the social setting. But in terms of other things culturally, as an anthropology researcher, I was very set on kind of following what my host family was doing and opening myself up to a lot of different experiences, whether that be the food or their sense of time, eating meals a lot later. And I would try to spend a lot of the time with my host family, which got hard when I wanted to spend a lot of my time doing work as well. So that got kind of difficult, and I would try to do that when my family was doing something else or when they were asleep. So that got a little difficult, but you do have to just decide at a certain point when you need your own space, which is something that we tend to do a lot as Americans, and kind of give ourselves our own space. One of my host moms commented that an American student she had in the past, she was always so confused because she would just be locked up in her room all the time, and she didn't understand because her family liked to spend all their time in the living room together, even if they were doing work, but just doing it in the same place. So that was big for me, deciding to just, even if I was doing work, to do it with the rest of the family. Another thing, just for me, in terms of the culture, was language. Just trying to make a really big effort to get the more local accent phrases, to make an effort to understand those, and also just understand the certain colloquial terms that I wouldn't want to misuse in certain social situations. Yeah.
In terms of culture, I spent my formative years in St. Lucia, but I have lived a lot longer in America than there, so I remember many of the protocols, but not all. And I've also become more informal by virtue of being in America. So it was great to have mentors on the ground who knew all the protocols for the times when I didn't observe that they were needed. For example, I was holding a workshop, and this was a secular event about research, but I was told by my mentors, you have to open it with a prayer or people will be concerned and wonder why not, and you have to have the national anthem played. And so things like that I wouldn't have thought of, even though I knew how to address people and that sort of thing. And I believe, though, at times I chose purposely to be informal, knowing that they would forgive me because they would assume I'd been Americanized. So it was a little bit of both.
For me, going to Uganda, I guess I didn't really know what to expect in terms of dress. I kind of expected to be wearing t-shirts and jeans a lot of the time, but it turned out everyone dressed a lot more formally than I expected. So that was kind of a bit unexpected, and I definitely adapted to it, and it was fine. But I did get called out for not wearing skirts on various occasions. One woman on the street got really angry at me once, and that created a scene that I was not welcoming. But yeah, I would say kind of do that research beforehand. If I had asked the relevant questions of people, contacts on campus, or just anyone, send an email to someone who has been there, I think those questions and experiences could very easily be avoided.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's like basically two strategies. You could either more assimilate to the culture that you're in, or you can sort of like, as Matt said, be like, well, I have a specific deadline. Can you please just keep pushing? Can you please meet with me at this time? Specifically in South Africa, they have this thing called Africa Time. You'll be let's say you're in a restaurant, you'll be like, the waitress will come and be like, oh, I'll be with you now. And they'll come back 30 minutes later, because now is just has a different meaning. Or they'll be like, I'll come just now. Just now is an hour and a half, which you wouldn't really expect. So, I mean, punctuality, specifically in that context, was just completely different, and you couldn't really, like, I don't know. People would look at you as sort of like, calm down. Like, what are you in such a hurry for? Like, just sit down, have some food. We'll be with you soon. And Stanford especially, we're in 10 weeks, and like every minute of every day, like we're either using efficiently or efficiently not using. Like, I'm gonna hang out for 10 minutes so I can like have a study break. So you just got to be aware of where you're coming from, and sort of just learn about how to adjust where you are.
Great responses. I guess I could add that in China, I just really had to carry a sense of respect with me when I was interviewing older individuals, the elderly. And one important thing was that I had to prevent myself from letting any judgment that I had influence my interviews. So mine, I did like some public health observations, then conducted interviews, and so there'd be like kids' behaviors that I knew were like making them sick or like making them more prone to infection. And a huge part of me just wanted to tell the parents, like, you should advise your kids to wash their hands, you should do this, you should do that, but it's not good. So I just had to make sure, remind myself to be like a third-party investigator, just have that sense of respect. And then the second thing was language. I realized the huge importance of, if you don't know the language there, at least have a willingness to want to learn it. And that really breaks down barriers and makes it a lot easier to communicate and relate to people.
A couple of other reactions, picking up on this theme of time. While you were waiting for somebody who said he or she will be there just now, which might be an hour and a half, try people watching. It's a great sport. And you're just going to learn a lot just simply observing the people who go by, how they're behaving. Have that as a part of your cultural experience. Another thought has to do with an American tendency not only to be informal, which you've picked up already, but a tendency to be very direct. Hi, my name is Joe Jones, and I'm here to do the following project. Will you please start answering my questions? no, no, and no. There are many cultures where you can't get to the real point of your meeting until you've talked about the weather, until you've talked about how is your grandfather. Tell me a little bit about your country. They may have questions of you before they allow you to have questions of them. Here's where you can talk to a local friend who is from the culture, who can give you some advice about when it is appropriate for you to ask your question and when it is inappropriate because it's just too darn quick. You haven't established a sense of who the other person is or that person of you before you're allowed to ask a question. So think about that timing question. Slow yourself down, even as you may want to ask other people to speed themselves up to meet with you. Okay, let's just have a few minutes of conversation about some of these cultural issues that you've either had yourself, to the extent that you've been in other situations, or that you expect that you'll have this summer. And then the gong, as usual, will soon ring.